So this is the final episode of building my first little trapping cabin. I have a few finishing touches that I want to make, and I also want to reflect on everything that I learned while building this and what I would do differently for the next one. Hinges can be complicated or they can be really simple. This is just two straight pieces of wood with a nail through it. It's important to understand what the purpose of this cabin was. This is a trapping cabin. It's not a house to live in. This is to keep me warm in the wintertime when I'm running my trap lines. It frequently gets down to negative 40 degrees here, and having little outpost cabins could save your life. Because of this guy here, my hinges aren't allowed to touch this wall, so I had to add spacers. I modeled it after the historic trapping cabins here on the Kenai Peninsula of Alaska. I've actually seen a few of these cabins that have been standing for over 100 years, and they're made with exactly the same supplies: spruce logs and moss for chinking. It's also not a primitive shelter. It's one step above a survival shelter. And the quickest way to build a cabin like this is with a chainsaw. So I used my chainsaw for everything. I cut the door, I cut the logs, I felled the trees, everything with my chainsaw. But the idea is to be able to put all of your tools in a backpack or on the back of a snow machine or a dog sled, whatever, and get the tools out in one trip, construct a cabin in maybe a couple of weeks, and then use that as an outpost shelter for the rest of trapping season. This type of roof is the traditional Alaskan trapper cabin style of roof. It's just the forest floor moss. I also sprinkled some wildflower seeds up there just kind of for fun. There's a secondary benefit to the moss that I didn't take into consideration when I built the cabin, and that is how much cooler it is inside the cabin than outside. And I think the reason for this is because the moss is very wet, so it's evaporating away heat. The reason I put it there was more for insulation in the winter, but it kind of works as a form of AC as well, which I think is really cool. The foundation, I did some things good and some things bad. These bricks are sideways, and some of you guys noticed that and commented, and I will probably come back here with a car jack. I'm just dreading carrying one in. But if I jack up this log, I can rotate that brick and it should be no trouble at all. And I think that the biggest mistake that I made was not extending the roof way far over the cabin. These logs are super rot resistant. I work on a dog sled lot, and we put some spruce logs in the ground and drove some lag bolts in there, and that's what holds the sled dog. The spruce logs last about 15 years in the ground, so these logs are super rot resistant, but even so, it would last longer if I had extended these roof boards another foot or so that the rain wouldn't hit the logs. I could have done that either by extending the beam or just extending these slabs when I put the roof on. I'm already collecting logs for a much bigger cabin, but I'm gonna have to buy a remote property before I do it. The next one I plan to be at least 16 by 12. Currently I'm just collecting 20-foot logs, and when you do a longer cabin, it's more important that you alternate which way the logs go, so that the fat end is on this side and then the next log, the fat end, is on this side. And that way, as you build up, your walls are level. The quick construction log cabin builds, you leave a little bit of space and then add chinking. This is more common than you might think. If you actually look at log cabins around, you'll see the thick chinking layer. And the reason that they do that is because logs aren't perfectly straight. And if you leave a gap on purpose and then you use a high quality chinking, you end up with a very solid cabin, and it's easier to stuff into those gaps, because if it was touching the logs, then you wouldn't be able to squeeze it through from both sides. If I was to make a beautiful cabin, I would take an adze and I would actually hollow out the top log so that it fit on the bottom one. And I would still put chinking in the gap and then lay the logs down. But that's a totally different style of construction, and that's not what I was intending with this cabin. This was supposed to be quick, simple, and efficient. Something that I can build 5 or 10 in the summer along my trap line. And if I was gonna spend 2 whole years building a cabin that was livable, I'd do it a totally different way. But regardless, this was a great learning experience that will help me towards my goals in the future. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to come to Alaska and stake a claim. There's still a recreational cabin staking system. and residents of Alaska can fly to remote locations, stake a claim, and I'm working towards that. We moved to Alaska in 2020. We got better at hunting. I'm learning to trap, but that's something that you can't just jump into with no knowledge. I'm gonna have to build a lot of skills and save up some money before I can just get dropped off by an airplane in some remote section of Alaska and stake a claim. And this cabin was my attempt to take baby steps into that dream. And I think I'm on the right path. There will be one more video about the construction of this cabin, and it'll be a full build. I don't talk in the video. It's just start to finish cabin build, kind of a time-lapse sort of thing. I'll post that next weekend. Thanks for watching. See you guys next week.